Hated or feared? If a heel does a really good job, he might be a little bit of both. And in the case of your number 5 most effective heel, you could argue for days if anyone has ever been as hated and feared as Ed Farhat, the Sheik.
He was a good heel. I don't know if he'd be in, I wouldn't know if I'd put him in my top 5.
Yeah, he was ahead of his time.
He would have to be number 1 on my list.
Who? Ed Farhat?
I watched the Sheik a little bit. Yeah, he was okay. But that was the old school.
He incited the fans. I'd say probably in at least the top 10.
Well, whenever you have a foreigner come into America and try to do anything, that's instant heat right there. That's instant heat.
I know absolutely nothing about the original Sheik.
You know he was Sabu's uncle?
Yes, I know he was Sabu's uncle. I know who he is. I've never seen a match, and I'm sorry, Sabu.
Now, I'm going to tell you why I say who. Back in the day, as we say, when I started out in this business, no one knew who Ed Farhat was. He was so true to his gimmick of the Sheik that his next-door neighbors only knew him as the Sheik. My ex-wife, on our honeymoon, we went to Toronto on our honeymoon, which is probably why we're divorced, because I took her to wrestling, and I introduced her to the Sheik. And he kissed her hand and went, whatever he said. I said, thank you. He used to go into phone booths. There were no cell phones back then. And he'd be talking to someone, and if somebody, a fan, might have passed by and knocked or something, he'd go, he'd make like he was talking in Arabic.
Yeah, he was off the hook. Yeah, and people believed what he was doing. You know, they had to.
Oh my God, Sheik. Yeah, actually had the honor of meeting him a few times. The first time I met him, I was 17 years old, and he scared the daylights out of me at 17. I wasn't even in the business yet. I was just Chris's girlfriend. We were high school sweethearts. And we had a show. Actually, Chris had a show in Asbury Park. Sabu was on the show, so was Sheik. I can't remember who ran the show. And we all went out to dinner afterwards, and it was like a whole group of 20 of us at this little Italian place, I think called Vic's or something like that. And the Sheik grabs me by the wrist. You're sitting next to me. Made me sit down next to him. I'm like, what's going on? He's got his knife in his mouth at the dinner table. He's like holding me there, and he's going to Sabu, this is my next wife, this is my next wife. And I'm like, what the hell is going on? So he scared the crap out of me, being the heel out at dinner. You know what I mean? I was even smart by then, but still, it scared the crap out of me. So was he an effective heel? Absolutely. Because he kept it going outside of the ring. He really did.
People believed him as a bad guy because he never strayed from the Sheik gimmick. He was the Sheik day and night, and because he never strayed from it, part of the success of his nephew, Sabu, was because of the belief that you don't stray from your gimmick. In terms of effective, oh my God, I used to see him when I shot pictures at ringside, taking that number 2 Eberhard Faber pencil and really putting it into Abduller's head, and oh man, he believed everything he did. That's what made him so effective, and we all believed it too.
He was vicious, and he had good facial expressions. He looked like he was out there. When he was working, he made people believe what he was doing because they would look at his face, you know, and they would see this guy isn't there, you know. He was able to do that. He was able to transmit that to, yeah.
I wrestled him one time, as I remember, and that was a TV match in Detroit. And I remember prior to that as a fan, I've had people ask me who is the most effective heel. And to me, he was someone that as a fan, when you looked at him, he would strike fear in you. And if he came towards you, you wouldn't freeze for a moment and think, what do I do? You would instinctively turn and run. And he wasn't in terms of physical presence, was not a big man, but it was the look in his face and the things that he did, where he'd have been number 1 on my list.
You know, I didn't try to make people fear me, and most good heels didn't want you to fear them. They wanted you to hate them. There's a difference between I despise that guy, I hate him, or I fear him. People feared Bruiser Brody. The Japanese people and their fans feared Bruiser Brody because he looked like this Neanderthal man from the caveman era with a big beard and a bushy hair and furry boots and running around and had a chain. He'd grab the chairs and whip the chairs out from under people, and the kids would run and scream. That's a fear factor. Now, Andre didn't have fear. Andre the Giant, people didn't fear him. They hated him because he turned on Hogan. He was the most loved guy in the world besides Hogan, but when he turned on Hogan, they didn't fear him, they hated him.
It's like Abdullah. Abdullah's effective. Abdullah stole Farhat's gimmick, or Farhat stole Abdullah's gimmick, or whatever, but when you have to go out and get juice within the first 2 or 3 minutes of the match, of course people are going to react. See, my impression of an effective heel is it starts out and just builds and builds and builds and builds. And you don't really have to get blood, or you don't have, but there's intensity. It's a roller coaster.
Yeah, I would say so, because he changed the way people looked at bad guys, because he did a lot of blood and the fire, and he would climb up the walls, and a real bizarre character. Not a great interview guy like some good heels, but yeah. I would put him in there as one of the top 5.
Is again one of those guys, kind of like Abdullah, when you got to start, whenever you get blood from somebody with a plastic fork or a knife or somebody, everybody knows there's always a gimmick involved. And I think your best heels in the world can get heat without having to use gimmicks all the time.
When I first started, the Sheik took a liking to me, and actually was one of the first promoters that I worked for. And but I saw him do a lot of cheap things, and one of the cheap things I thought was that him and Butcher and the guys of that era had to get juice all the time. Well, of course you're going to get a reaction.
It might be a little easy, but if that can get over, if you can get over doing it, do it. If that'll get you over, that's instant heat, and it's an instant heel gimmick that will work.
I would have put the Sheik higher.